Welcome to Hellenic Heritage Journeys. Here, we share the fascinating stories hidden within Greece's archaeological sites. In every episode, we take a journey through space and time, uncovering the traces of people who lived, created, and left their mark thousands of years ago. Follow the thread of history with us from yesterday to today. This episode was created in collaboration with Marketing Greece. Along the eastern coastline of Attica, some 35 kilometers east of Athens and where the small Erasinos River flows towards the sea, lies one of the most evocative landscapes of antiquity and one of the most important sanctuaries of the region, the Sanctuary of Artemis. Picture a group of young girls from prominent Athenian families, dressed in yellow robes, moving rhythmically around an altar, holding burning torches. To the ancient Athenians, these girls were not simply children. They were the arktoi, the little bears of the goddess Artemis. They were taking part in the arktoi, a sacred rite of passage that prepared them for the transition from childhood innocence to married life and motherhood. How important was this sanctuary that it became inseparably linked with the Acropolis of Athens itself? How did a cave come to be identified as the mythical tomb of a princess who escaped sacrifice? In this episode, we follow the deep wheel marks carved into the ancient stone bridge that once led to the sanctuary, and we bring back to life what unfolded here thousands of years ago. With its renowned Sanctuary of Artemis, Brauron was never an isolated sacred site. Its land was always fertile, sustaining human life as early as the 4th millennium BC. Human presence becomes especially evident during the Mycenian period, in the 14th and 13th centuries BC, confirmed by the extensive cemetery discovered at the site known as Lapouchi. As the historian Strabon tells us, tradition held that Brauron was one of the 12 ancient cities united by the mythical king of Athens, Kekrops, to form Attica. Its prehistoric acropolis, on what is today known as Komeno Lithari Hill, rises above the Sanctuary of Artemis, a reminder that this place has been continuously inhabited for some 6,000 years. Although the sanctuary flourished mainly in the 7th century BC, its first places of worship were built in the 6th century BC. Indeed, Brauron reached the height of its political importance in 507 BC. This was the time of Clisthenes' democratic reforms in Athens, part of the constitutional reorganization of the city-state, when the sanctuary was incorporated into the rural demi, or local administrative district, of the Philaides. From this powerful line emerged leading figures who shaped Athenian history, including Miltiades, the general who secured victory at Marathon, his son Cimon, and the tyrant Pisistratus. But how did Brauron become so closely associated with the worship of Artemis, transforming it into one of the most important sacred sites of the ancient world? At Brauron, Artemis was not worshipped as the goddess of the hunt, as she often was elsewhere. Here, she was revered as the protector of women, of marriage, childbirth, and the raising of children. It was this aspect of the goddess that gave rise to the arktoi, the rite of passage in which the arktoi, young girls from prominent Athenian families, were prepared for their future role in society. But how did the goddess Artemis come to be worshipped here in the first place? According to the version told by the playwright Euripides, the answer lies in myth. When Orestes and Iphigenia escaped from the land of the Taurians in present-day Crimea, they carried with them the Xoanon, the ancient wooden cult statue of Artemis. Following the instruction of the goddess Athena, they traveled to Brauron and founded a temple there to house it. There is, however, a more local version of the myth that binds Iphigenia even more closely to Brauron. According to this tradition, the Achaeans set out for Troy not from Aulis, but from here, from Brauron itself. It was here that their king, Agamemnon, prepared to sacrifice his daughter, Iphigenia. And in this version too, the goddess Artemis saves her at the very last moment. But instead of leaving a deer in her place, as the better-known Aulis myth tells it, she leaves a bear, an arktoi, and carries the princess away to her temple in the land of the Taurians. Iphigenia later returned to Brauron, where she served as the sanctuary's klidouchos, its first priestess. Access to the sanctuary from the Asti, the city of Athens, was via a road that led to a stone bridge crossing the Erasinos River, a bridge that still survives today. The deep wheel ruts carved into its surface bear witness to the constant flow of worshippers making their way to the sanctuary. The Temple of Artemis, built on elevated ground in the southwestern part of the sanctuary, was Doric in style and the most important building within the complex. Although it was destroyed by the Persians, it was rebuilt after 450 BC, and additional buildings were later added to serve the sanctuary's religious and practical needs. Inside the temple stood the over-life-sized cult statue of the goddess. It was an acrolith, a type of statue with a wooden core and marble head and limbs. Marble fragments of it can still be seen today in the Archaeological Museum of Brauron. In front of the temple, to the east, stood the altar where worshippers presented their offerings. And in the northwestern corner of the temple, the sacred spring flowed. It was here that discoveries were made which, in a way, allow us to glimpse the women of antiquity. Vessels, figurines, and mirrors, along with engraved siltstones of semi-precious stone depicting animals, a reminder of Artemis's role as protector of the natural world. There were also rare wooden votive offerings and personal objects. Among them were 2 decorated soles from women's shoes, dedications made in gratitude for a safe childbirth or in the hope of winning the goddess's favor. North of the temple, construction began in 420 BC on the great colonnaded gallery, or stoa, built in the shape of the Greek letter pi. Although its eastern wing was never completed, the structure had an entrance from the west and contained 11 rooms. These spaces were used for the communal feasts of the men who took part in the goddess's festival. In the area of the stoa, bases were found where parents placed statues of their children as votive offerings, asking for the goddess's protection. Behind this structure stood a second colonnade, known as the North Stoa. It contained 37 rectangular bases that once supported the lefkomata, wooden boards inscribed with the names of the arktoi. To the southeast of the temple lies a cave identified with the mythical tomb of Iphigenia, the so-called Kenirion, a cenotaph or tomb without a body, for the princess who escaped sacrifice and later became the sanctuary's first priestess. As early as the 8th century BC, the cave had become the center of the cult of Iphigenia, where she was honored as a chthonic heroine associated with the underworld and with death. It was here that women dedicated the garments of those who had died in childbirth. After the cave's roof collapsed, a small temple was built in order to continue the ritual functions of the site, the so-called Brauron of Iphigenia, along with the adjacent structure known as the Sacred House. Every 4 years, the quiet of the sanctuary gave way to one of the most splendid festivals in Attica. The Brauronia were not merely a local celebration. The festival began in the heart of Athens itself. Pisistratus and his sons had established a branch of the Sanctuary of Brauronian Artemis on the sacred rock of the Acropolis, the so-called Brauronion. This alone reveals how important Brauron was to the Athenian elite. From there, the faithful gathered and set out in a grand procession that crossed the Attica countryside, passing through the local administrative districts of Mesogia, before reaching the banks of the Erasinos River. Once the procession reached the sanctuary, the worshippers presented their offerings to the goddess, and the site filled with the sounds of rhapsodic contests and, most likely, athletic competitions. The men gathered in the 11 rooms of the pie-shaped stoa for formal banquets, while the women carried out their most sacred duty, dressing the cult statue of Artemis in the robes they had woven especially for her. The climax of the festival was the dance of the arktoi. Picture the girls moving in procession, dressed in their yellow robes, dancing around the great altar. In the glow of the torches they carried, the young little bears of Artemis completed their initiation into the world of women. And beyond the Brauronia, festivals were also held every year in honor of the goddess, though this had a more local character. Despite the splendor and prosperity the sanctuary enjoyed during the classical period, the Hellenistic era brought gradual decline and eventual abandonment. Two main forces led to its end: the power of nature and the harsh realities of war. The Erasinos River, which for thousands of years had sustained the fertility of Brauron, began to behave unpredictably. Its floods grew more frequent and more severe until the ground of the sanctuary slowly sank beneath water and mud. At the same time, the historical circumstances were unforgiving. The Chremonidian War, fought between 267 and 261 BC, and which shook Attica, likely delivered the final blow. The inhabitants and the priests were forced to abandon the site. Silence settled over the temple and the other buildings of the sacred complex. And yet, the mud of the Erasinos, the very force that drove people away, became a protective cloak. It covered the buildings, the rare wooden votive offerings, the vessels and the statues of children, sealing them away from air and from looters. Had these natural events not occurred, we might not have these remarkable archaeological finds today, nor the stories they have brought back to light. Today, Brauron remains a place where nature and history exist in constant dialogue. As you walk among the remains of the sanctuary and trace the wheel marks etched into the ancient bridge, you begin to understand that Brauron is not simply an archaeological site. It carries the memory of the thousands of women and children who came here seeking the protection of their goddess. It is a place that reminds us that the sacredness of life, of birth, and of transition endures across the centuries. This is where our journey comes to an end. We hope you enjoyed the story and the path we shared. If you'd like to discover more of Greece's cultural treasures, follow our channel, Hellenic Heritage Journeys, on Spotify. Until next time.